And you can hit your little message
All right, so we're recording now.
now.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Milton Bowens, but I actually go by Milton 510. That's my artistic signature. And a lot of times when people see my artistic signature, they get a little curious and they're like, why do you got those numbers behind your name? Now, when people read my bio, they think it's because I was born and raised in Oakland, California, which the area code in Oakland, California is 510. But I actually put the 510 behind my name because I am the fifth boy in a family of 10 children. I'm actually the fifth boy and the 10th child. So when I sign all of my artwork, Milton 510, it's really a silent tribute to my family because my artwork is very personal. And as an artist, it's a subtle reminder to me that no one gets, to different stations in their life without a support network. And for me, becoming a fine artist was an entire family effort. I had a huge support network through my brothers and sisters, and that's just a way for me to show that I appreciate everything that they sacrificed to help becoming a fine artist. So this evening, I'm joining you to do a very unique project, and hopefully we were going to do this over the course of the next 3 weeks. This is the introductory lesson. I always like to start with a lesson that has to do with how do we think creatively as artists. One of the key things about art is not necessarily the materials or even the method. Those are all things that you're going to learn over the course of the next 3 weeks. We're going to get familiar with certain materials. I'm going to show you different methodology, different methods of approach to being creative. But the first aspect to any art is the ability to think creatively. Now, once you get comfortable with thinking creatively, then the creative doors just fly wide open. And then that's when you can show off your own unique personal gifts and talents, and you can embellish and add to or subtract to any lesson. You can get comfortable with using any aspect of the materials that are provided, and that's what makes art unique. But before we get to those aspects of art, the first thing I like to do is hone in on the creative thinking process. So these exercises are designed to get the brain comfortable with thinking outside of the normal constraints of the way you think. And I know it sounds a little disjointed, but it's about identifying things that your brain is already familiar with, but redirecting them in a creative fashion. For example, if I wrote this letter on my paper, could you identify it? Well, immediately the brain is going to go to this. So, we learn our alphabets, early on, some pre-K, some in kindergarten. And as we go through all levels of education, we become familiar with letters. But letters aren't the only thing that we become familiar with. We also become very familiar with color and shape at a very early age. So we know that these things are already embedded in our memory bank, and our brain can identify them immediately. So looking at this letter, I would challenge the entire group. Let's start with this. I want everybody right now to write a letter S in the middle of your paper. Now, the materials we should have in front of us are scratch paper or sketch pad, pencil, or black marker. Either one, doesn't matter. We could do this in pencil, we could do this in marker, we could do it in black crayon. That doesn't matter. We just need something to write with, and we need something to write on. So right now, take your materials and give me a capital letter S in the middle of your paper. Once we have our capital S in the middle of our paper, that is going to start the thinking process. Because what is it doing there? Why is this S just floating in the middle of the paper? Well, because we haven't given our brain or our hand any other instructions other than writing this S. Now, here's the beauty of step-by-step art. When we do step-by-step art, there's a trick involved. It's not something to trip you up. It's really just a trick to see if you have discipline, to see if you can follow creative instruction. So when I say draw this S, that's exactly what I mean. Draw this S exactly the way I drew it, not the way you might be familiar with writing or drawing, because we all have different handwriting. But remember, we're not writing a letter to a friend. We're not writing an essay. We're making a picture. So it's very important that we write this S exactly the way it appears on the paper. Now, once we have this S written, I want you to go up into the top corner of your paper and I want you to write this word. R O S E. Rose. Now, we know a rose is a flower, but we're going to be looking for this flower in this letter. Stay with me. We are looking at this letter S. Now, we know that the letter S appears in the word rose. We see that. It's immediate connection. The brain is going to make that connection for us. What we are going to try to do is we're going to try to look at this letter and turn it into this flower. But before we get there, let's get our brain warmed up. Let's get our brain thinking creatively. Let's try to make some creative connections. So if we're looking at this letter S and I ask the group, are there any numbers that are similar to this letter? Numbers. Like I said, early on, the brain gets embedded and it records numbers, shapes, colors, and symbols. So if we're looking at this letter S, are there any other numbers that are similar to the letter S? Well, a lot of times when we ask this question in creative circles and we do word association, when I say, tell me something you see in this letter S, you're going to get things like snake. You're going to get things like string. So typically the brain immediately associates this shape with other things that start with the letter S. But rose doesn't start with the letter S. So that's breaking the creative familiarity. So it's not always about something that's familiar. It's about looking for things that are familiar that are outside the obvious. So let's look for some things that are outside the obvious, which would be numbers, because numbers are not letters. So if I'm looking at the numbers that are familiar with this letter S, I probably am going to see a number 8. Immediately, somebody might see a number 5. You could possibly see a 6 or a 9. We could see a number 3 because a 3 is just half of a number. And then ultimately, there's probably somebody that's going to say, I see a number 2. Now, those are going to be the immediate connections. You might see some other numbers in here, but it would be a stretch because remember, we're working on the basic structure of the letter S. So now let's move back to our original word, which is the word rose. Like I said, I want us to find that rose in that S. So right now, before we go any further, I want everybody to write each one of these numbers on your paper exactly where I have them on my paper. You don't have to do it in any particular order. You could do the number 5 first, go to the 8, do the 6, do the 9, do the 3, do the 2. Doesn't matter. Just do them on your paper and see if you can place them where I have mine placed on my paper. So now, once we have our letter and all of our numbers, what we want to do is start to address the project itself, which is we're going to make our brain find this flower. So we're going to find this flower in this letter. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come right here on the letter S, right where our S starts to curve, and we are going to connect the back of our S. I want you to do that right now. Connect the back of your S. Once you've connected the back of your S, I want you to actually now take a minute and look at all of your numbers. Like I told you, this is association. We're training our brain to think creatively. And as we move to some of our other projects, you're going to see how this really helps you start to think outside the box creatively. Now, I know immediately that looks like that 6. The only difference is the 6 doesn't curve all the way over around the top, but I can see that 6, which means if I can see that 6 and I turned it upside down, I could see this 9. So now I am going to come back to my original letter. I am going to start at the top and connect the top of the S to the body of the S, which now gives me a new shape. I want everybody to do that right now. Connect the top of your S to the body of your S. After you do that, I want you to take some time and I want you to look. Does that shape now look like any of these other numbers? Immediately, my brain takes me to the number 8. So now, since my brain takes me to the number 8, I'm going to start eliminating certain things. I want to take this 3 and I want to make it look like the number 8. I want everybody to connect their letter. Then I want you to take your 3 and make it look like that letter 8. So the 3 is already gone. Now we're dealing with 2 8s, a 5, a 6, a 9, and a 2. Keep that in mind. The next thing I want to do is I want to look at this, and my end goal is to find this flower. So for the very first time, I am going to make a shape that is not connected or didn't start with the original letter. I am going to come in here and I'm going to add a backwards letter C. Once I add my backwards letter C, this is going to start to come into focus. I'm going to start to see something. So right now, I want you to add the backwards letter C to your S. Once you have your backwards letter C added to your original S, which now looked like a number 8, I want you to look at this number 9 and look at it very closely. Because all we're going to do is take this number 9 and we're going to place it in the middle of our new composition. I'm going to take my 9 and I'm going to place it in the middle of our composition. Now something's starting to come into focus. So go ahead on your paper, take that 9, place it into the middle of your composition. Once we have that in place, we're going to go ahead and we're going to make this composition. Now, I'm going to do it first, and then I'm going to walk you through it after I do it, so we can see how these familiar things came together. So I'm going to come back into the middle of our original composition, and I'm going to drop another line. You can be as creative with this line as you want to be. So when you get to the point to do that, you could choose to be as creative as you want to be. I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to add a leaf. So now I want you to add your line, depending on how you drew your numbers on the page. You could put that line anywhere you want to put it, but we want to come down to the bottom of our page. We want to make sure that our stem to our flower, our rose, comes down to the bottom of the page. Add your flower. Now, there's a word in art called composition. Right now, our composition is incomplete. All that word composition means that everything on this page has to work in harmony. It's like a music song. It's like the music, the melody, the rhythm, the chorus, the hook, the break. It all has to work together. So right now, we got some things that are not working together, but they're in our composition, which means this is a wrong note right now. This note is off. This melody is too fast. This melody is too slow. This hook doesn't work, and this rhythm is out of rhythm. We have to make all of these things come together so we have one beautiful, harmonious song. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to use the steps that we used on the letter S. And all I'm going to do is follow the same steps that I did for the S. I'm going to connect the back, the front, add my backward C. On this side, I have to connect the front and add my C. I am just going to add a regular C, a backward C, connect the back, the front, back, front. And now I am going to attach all those numbers until I get a rose bush. The only thing missing is I'm going to come back and put my number 9 in the center of each one. And now I have a rose bush with the word rose. But even if I followed the same steps, even these would become roses as well. Your only limitations in art are the obstacles you put in front of yourself. Your brain is already geared to solve problems. Art is just a creative way of problem solving. And once you learn the steps, those steps can be applied to any obstacle, and you're going to have a creative outcome in that solution. An S to a rose, as well as any other number or shape you see, you can convert to that exact same thing because you control the creative outcome. Okay, we're going to move on to another warm-up project. This is a fun one. I like to do this one a lot because, you know, there are simple things that we can do that brain, get warmed up. So now, this is what I want you to do. I'm going to write a word, not just a letter this time, but a complete word. And when I write this word, the trick is, can you actually write this word exactly the way I write it? So let's start by doing the letter B. Then I'm going to do the letter O. Then I'm going to do the letter Y. So right now on your paper, we should be working with a new piece of paper. We put our piece of paper with the rows aside, or we change the page in our sketch pad and we're starting with a new piece of paper. On your new piece of paper, I want you to try to write these letters exactly the way I wrote them and exactly where I wrote them at on my piece of scratch paper. They're right in the middle. Now, we know this word is boy. So if I'm looking for things that are familiar, if my brain is going to look for things that are familiar, the first thing it's going to look for is a boy. So let's see if we can help this outcome. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to draw a line across both of my round shapes. I want you to do the same thing right now. Draw a line across your B and then draw a line across that O. Now I'm going to come back in and I'm going to do 2 circles. I'm going to put a little circle on either side and I'm going to color these in. You go ahead and do the same thing. Now I'm going to come back and I'm going to put a letter C. You should already be able to see it. Go ahead and put that letter C in the middle of your thing. It should go right between your B and your O. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down from the bottom of my B. I'm going to go out a little bit, but I'm going to loop around and connect to my Y. So it's like making a letter U, but you're going to exaggerate the left side. Go ahead and do the same thing. Now, once I get that done, I'm going to come back up here and I'm actually just going to come across and I'm going to make a letter Z. I'm going to go there, I'm going to come down, and then I'm going to bring the bottom to connect it to there. Just like a funny letter Z. It's just an extended letter Z. Now from there, I'm going to add a little hair. I'm going to come here. And just add some hair. He could have a stylish hairdo or he could be having a bad hair day. That's totally up to you. But we're just going to add a little hair. Go ahead and add some hair to my little guy. Now from here, I'm going to add, we're going to start going for some personality. Any of these little symbols that we bring in are going to determine how this guy's day is going. So we're going to put a little line over his eye. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to add 2 backward C's. So now he has a little ear. I'm actually going to put a little line here and a little line here. Then I'm going to bring that line across and then I'm going to add a letter U underneath. Now our little guy has a smile. If you want it, we could come back in and we could add some straight down. Now he's got some teeth. Go ahead. I'm going to pause for a minute to let you catch up. Let's go ahead and make those connections. We started with our Z. We added our hair. We put a little accent over our B, add a little personality. We started with 2 lines. We connected those lines with the top line. We added a U underneath. Then we came down with 3 lines to give some teeth. You don't actually have to do that. That's just an added. These are where we start to, make these personal. So now I'm going to come back. If everybody's caught up, I'm going to come back into my composition and I'm going to bring 2 lines down. We're creating a neck. So now I'm going to actually close that off. And then I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to bring this down. And this basically gives us our boy. I could come back and put anything on here that I want to put on here. I could come back. Do an A for Alabama, Roll Tide. It doesn't matter. You could decorate this however you wanted to decorate it. You can come back in. You could add that. We could bring down. We could add arms. I could put some stripes on his shirt. There are so so much you could do once you get that basic composition in. But the big question I want to ask everybody is, can you still see the word boy? Can you see where we actually started? B-O-Y, boy. Now we actually have an entire composition of a boy, starting with the word boy. The rest is totally up to you of how you want to finish your composition. We can add a horizon line behind them. So now we know we are dealing with foreground, middle ground, and background. So much that could be done. Okay, let's move on. We're going to set this one aside and we're going to go to another one. So we did boy, we did our rows. Let's shoot for a bigger composition. So get a brand new piece of paper or turn the page in your sketch pad, and I am going to start with 3 letters. U, F, O. Now, if I was there with you in person, the first question I would ask you is, what is a UFO? UFOs are commonly called a few different things. Usually when I ask that question in person, the first response I get is people will say, it's a flying saucer, which is 100% correct. It is a flying saucer, but UFO does not stand for flying saucer. UFO actually stands for unidentified flying object, which over time, and because I watch a lot of sci-fi movies, I know immediately that an unidentified flying saucer is more commonly known as, a UFO is more commonly known as a flying saucer. So once we know that, the brain is already going to start to try to make connections because we see the word. So we also associate UFOs with aliens. So there's a ton of alien movies. There's even a movie franchise that is titled Aliens. So now the first thing we want to do though is we want to start trying to find things that are similar. So what I want you to do is I want you to write these letters on your paper exactly the way I wrote them on my paper. Now I told you in step-by-step instruction, it's very important to follow the steps correctly. So we want these to actually be on the same page the way we have them, okay? So the next thing we want to do is we want to take this U and try to make it look like this O. So let's take that U and close the top. So now we're dealing with 2 things that look somewhat the same. The next thing we want to do is I want to start about a little over, maybe a half an inch away from the first O and go a half an inch past the next O. Now notice, did I make my line directly underneath everything so that it's touching? No, I didn't. I gave a little space so I'm not right underneath the letters. There's a space there. And I started a half an inch in front and I ended a half an inch on the backside. Go ahead and do that in your composition. So now we have 2 O's, an F, and a line underneath all of it. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to bring this F down and connect it to that line. And we're going to do the other side and bring it down and connect it. So now that looks more like a letter A that's connected to the line. Now, the next step we're going to do is we are going to take an upside down U and we are going to attach it to the end of these 2 lines. So before we do that, go ahead, extend that F and turn that F into an A. Once you have your F transformed into that letter A that is touching your bottom line, we are going to do our upside down letter U. Now, at first glance, some people might say, oh, we're making an alien. But the word we started with was UFO. Remember that. So the next thing I'm going to do is there's a shape that you learn in math class that is called a trapezoid. It is basically a triangle that is square on the top. It doesn't come to a point. So now, once we have our trapezoid in place, there's something we're going to do with it. So what I want you to do is I want you to draw that triangle that's flat at the top underneath your bottom line. Now I'm going to come back and I'm going to add some straight lines into my middle shape. If you look closely, this looks like one of those things that is called a beaker that you use in science class, where they put like chemicals and stuff in, and then you see them in these mad scientist labs and stuff is boiling out of them. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually draw one line, two lines, three lines, four lines, five lines. Go ahead and put that on your paper. Add those 5 additional lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now what we're going to do after we have that in our composition, I'm going to come down on this side and I'm going to basically draw an upside down, very long letter T. It's an upside down letter T. If I turn my composition upside down, you'll see that that is nothing but a very long letter T. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to deal with some basic shapes and some letters. The first letter I'm going to do is do a small letter O inside the O's that we already have. Go ahead and put 2 small letter O's inside the O that we already have. The next thing I'm going to do is I am going to use a triangle that is the same on 2 sides, but not the third side. So in math, when we get into algebra, we start to deal with shapes and angles. So that trapezoid will show up in algebra. So now when we start to look at other symbols that are connected to math, there are 3 very important triangles that are connected to math. There is a triangle that is equal on all 3 sides. That is an equilateral triangle. There is a triangle that is equal only on 2 sides, but not the third side. That's an isosceles triangle. And then there is a triangle that is uneven on all 3 sides. No sides are the same. That is called a scalene triangle. So we're going to do an isosceles triangle, a triangle that is basically the same on 2 sides, but not the third side. These 2 sides are the same, but that back side is different. Now we're going to do an upside down letter U. We're going to start almost in between our 2 O's and do a very tall upside down letter U. We are going to repeat that right where the top of our A actually was and do another one. Now we're going to draw a circle and do a dot in the middle. And then I want you to draw 2 squiggly lines. The only other thing I want you to do now is draw 1 straight line across. I'm going to pause now so you guys can catch up. But I'm actually drawing a character from one of my goddaughter's favorite cartoons of all time, SpongeBob. I'm not sure if any of you guys are familiar with SpongeBob, but that's Plankton from SpongeBob. It's that little green dude who's always getting into trouble on SpongeBob. So now we got Plankton inside our spaceship. You may have noticed that this right here, along with the two upside down letter T's, that means that our spaceship is actually not flying. This is landing gear. So if we have landing gear on our spaceship, that means that our spaceship is grounded. It's not actually in the air. So what do we have to do composition-wise to anchor this? Well, the first thing we do is I'm going to come over here to the side of my paper and I'm going to start to do a half circle. But now notice, anytime I get to a line, I stop and I start again. I'm going to come over here, start, stop. Then I'm going to come here and I'm going to start again. So now, nothing is running through something that already exists. Everything has its own place. Now we got a half circle. Now all I'm going to do in this half circle, this now becomes our foreground. Our spaceship is our middle ground, and everything behind this arc, everything behind this half circle now becomes our background. So we have foreground, middle ground, and background. These are the three key elements of composition when you're drawing: foreground, middle ground, and background. So in our foreground, we have to make these things look like they are close to us. I'm going to do a half circle here. I'm going to do a full long circle here. I'm going to do a half circle there, half circle here. I'm going to drop a few more circles over here. Change the direction on a couple of them. And now you're going to notice that we have, just from adding those circles, we have texture on our surface. So now Plankton and his UFO look like it's sitting on a planet. Back in the day, depending on how old you are, there used to be this thing where they used to say the moon was made of cheese because it looked like a big round piece of Swiss cheese. That's basically what you're going to do in your composition. So go ahead and add your circles and your texture into your planet that your spaceship is sitting on. Okay, so now that we know we have our spaceship, our character, and our moon, let's try to flush out the rest of this composition. We know that there's probably the planet Earth. We know that there's a planet in our solar system that has the rings, which is Saturn. There is going to be the planet, the big red planet, which is Mars. We know way out here would be the sun. Then there's going to be a couple of other little planets. You know, you got Pluto. But then the rest is just stars that exist in the universe. And now we have a complete composition. So go ahead, add a few additional planets, add a couple of stars, and now we have foreground, middle ground, and background. And it's ready to be put into full color. So the one thing is that when you look at this, you'll see that you are creating a color page that now we can go to a different medium. We could take our markers, we could take our color pencils, we could take watercolor, and we could actually bring this into full color. That is the goal of these projects. It's not just to solve the creative dilemma, but it's also to create something that we can actually continue to build another skill on. So we take these and then we actually can put them into color at a later time. So now I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked you when we did the word boy is, can you see where we started at? Can you still see the word UFO? UFO. But from that one 3-letter word, we get a complete composition. Okay. Now I want to do another fun one. This one I'm actually going to do on my big piece of paper. But if you're working still in your sketch pad, what I want you to do is I want you to take your sketch paper and I want you to turn it horizontal. Okay. So if you have been working vertical in your sketch pad, now I want you to turn your sketch pad horizontal. We're going to do this one horizontal. I just mentioned that there are 3 important triangles in math. And we talked about what they were. A triangle that is equal is an equilateral triangle. A triangle that is only equal on 2 sides and not the third side is an isosceles triangle. And a triangle that is unequal on all 3 sides is called a scalene triangle. So the first triangle we're going to make is that triangle that is not even on all 3 sides. I want you to start in the middle of your paper, draw a small line, angled like you're going to do a triangle. Go ahead. I'm going to wait for you. Now I'm going to draw the second line is going to be long. So we've taken that triangle and from the top and we've extended it out. So now when you draw the bottom line to connect this triangle, the bottom line is the longest line, meaning that no one of these sides are equal, which means all 3 sides are unequal, which makes it a scalene triangle. So now here's the trick. Underneath this triangle, we want to make a triangle that is equal, meaning that this line, and that line are all the same size. So now we have an equilateral triangle underneath a scalene triangle. Go ahead and make those 2 triangles. Scalene, equilateral. Now that third triangle, that isosceles triangle, the triangle that is equal on 2 sides, but not the third side, we're going to do upside down. The right and left lines should be exactly the same sides. The third line should be smaller. This is an isosceles triangle. Go ahead and attach that triangle to your 2 triangles that you've already done. Now we're going to do that one more time on the other side. Now, if we stopped right here and we looked real close and we let our brain start to creative problem solve, it's going to start to try to find things that it believes that is. So typically when I'm doing this lesson in person, I'm going to ask the group, is there anything you see in these 4 triangles? Because when I look at it, I start to see something that looks like something that I'm familiar with. But I'm going to do 2 more steps to see if it helps you solve the problem. I'm going to come back here, and where this triangle connects to the bottom, I'm actually going to do 2 backwards C's that connect. So I'm going to do that again, and I'm going to make them connect to the bottom of the triangles where they join together here. Now I'm starting to see it come into focus. Go ahead and put those C's in your picture. Some of you may already know what we're building with these triangles, and now these 2-letter C's, these half circles. I'm going to come back in and put a dot, and I'm going to color it in. And now you should see it clearly. It's a bird. But what kind of bird? That's the trick. Stay with me. What we're going to do is we're going to start right underneath this top triangle, and we're going to add a backwards curved line. We're still dealing with that backwards letter C. This time we just didn't curve it all of the way. I'm going to come where that line would extend here, and I'm going to take it all the way up, and I'm going to write a sideways letter M. If you look closely, it's just the letter M sideways. I took a letter M and I just brought it all the way over till it touches my triangle. I just did it sideways. Now I'm going to take the bottom of my M and I'm going to make a U that comes all the way around and stops at the bottom line of this triangle, where the top line of this line starts on top of the triangle, just like this. And now I got an angry bird. I'm going to pause here to let you catch up with what we're doing. Now, these are the basic steps for beginning animation. When animators make cartoons, I'm old school. I like to teach everybody how to do things by hand. There's a lot of math involved. So when you're doing animation, present day, on programs on your laptops or tablets and computers, the programs are doing a lot of this solving the problem for you. And all you're doing is touching an application and it's moving things around for you and you're putting things in place. But traditional animation is built on understanding shapes, symbols, and math. So there are certain things that you can do, and if you can master the replication of it, that's how you can keep things looking consistent as you go through these steps of animation. And that's how they build these cartoon characters by hand. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to come down on the bottom side of the beak on either side, and we are just going to drop a line down on either side. Go ahead and do that in your composition right now. Once you drop those 2 lines down, we're going to come back here and just put 3 circles. Notice I didn't do them the same size. These are just giving my angry bird that animation texture. Now, behind these 3 circles, I'm going to do 2 teardrops, a big one and a little one. And now that becomes the tail of my angry bird. Now, I want to prove a point to you. I'm going to push my angry bird aside, and I'm going to bring a new piece of paper in. The reason I'm bringing this new piece of paper in is because I'm going to show you, once you master these 3 triangles, scalene, equilateral, and isosceles, it doesn't matter what that outside shape is. If you can control that, you can control the outcome of the bird. So now we have the bomber. This could be the red bird or the little blue bird, depending on what color you colored it and depending on how big you did it. But now slightly change the shape, and now we have the bomber bird. So that could be the bomber. I could come back once I've mastered those 3 triangles, scalene, equilateral, isosceles. I can come back in and now I have the woodpecker, the triangle bird. Doesn't matter what that outside shape is. What matters is going to be capturing the core root of the animation, which is the face of that bird. So when we come back to our original bird, and if you know anything about Angry Birds, we know that they are propelled by a slingshot. This slingshot is what shoots that bird into the air. Now, the interesting thing about that is that slingshot is really just a letter Y. If you came and you did a letter Y, which is basically the letter V first, you draw a line on outside of the V and you come down 2 lines, close the bottom. It's really a letter Y. All you're going to do is do a couple of lines on the bottom and on the top to make it look like rope is tied to it. And you're going to do a sideways letter U, never letting anything go through your original line, just like we did on the spaceship for the UFO when we did the moon. Then we're going to come here and drop a line there so it looks like a slingshot. And then I'm going to draw a straight line. I stop at my Y and then I start again. Here, I just add basically a letter M, put a little another little dot, and then I'm going to continue my line. That just breaks up the horizon line, but it makes it look like it's grass. So these little tricks help suggest to the viewer that something is there more than just a straight line. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to add what we call in animation an action line, where I start with a curve. I do a real bubble M and then a real bubble W. And then I'm going to continue that line again. And I could even add 2 extra lines. That just looks like it's a puff of air. And now we know that there's some action going on, that my bird was shot out of my slingshot. Then once you have that in place, we can come back and we can add anything we want to add. I could add a sun, because what are we going for? We're going for foreground, middle ground, and background. I can come here. I can add a cloud. I could even go so far as to come here and add some little birds way off in the distance, because we know this big bird is our angry bird. I'll come here, and if any of you guys have ever played the game, you know that these birds, they are protecting something, and what they are protecting are eggs. And they are trying to hit these boxes that are filled with explosives. Now we have our Angry Bird composition. So I'm going to pause right here so you guys could catch up, build your composition. I want you to talk with the instructor in the room. If we got to any point where something went too fast or it wasn't easy to follow along, now's the time to ask your instructor who's there in the room with you so she can refresh, help guide you through the process. But ultimately, we have, at this point, we should have ended up with a few coloring pages that now we can put into full color. The rose was our icebreaker, but we should have a boy, a UFO, and an angry bird that we can all use as a coloring sheet. So let's pause right now for time. Make sure everybody is caught up. I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. And then I'm going to do my last step-by-step instruction. This will be the last one. Okay, so the last one for the evening, I want to do a fun one. I'm actually going to write the word first. So get your either turn your sketch pad or get a new piece of scratch paper. We want to place it horizontal. Now, when your artwork is sideways on your page, this is technically referred to as horizontal. Sometimes it will be referred to in studio class as landscape. Now, you're either landscape, horizontal, which is sideways, or your vertical portrait, because this also can be considered portrait when it's straight up and down. So straight up and down is vertical or portrait. Sideways is horizontal or landscape. So we're going to start horizontally. I'm going to write the word. Now, remember, you have to write your letters exactly the way I write mine. So I'm going to write the letter F. Now, that's not a normal way you write a letter F. That is a lowercase f. So you got to make sure you write it the way I write it. Then I'm going to write the letter L, and then I'm going to write the letter Y. Now notice that my Y starts where my F crosses. Now, write that in the center of your paper. Now, the first thing I'm going to do when I write this word fly is I'm actually going to take the bottom of my F and I'm going to bring it around and connect it to the top of my F. Then I'm going to do the same thing over here. And I'm going to draw a straight line across. I'm going to extend that F line straight across. First thing I'm going to do, go ahead, you do the same thing. By now, it should be easier for you to follow along. You already know the steps. You're comfortable now. All you got to do is follow the lines that I make, and you do them on your page as well, too. Now, the next thing I want to do is I actually want to extend this line all the way across till it touches the back of my Y. Notice, everything is connected. Now I'm going to bring this up and curve it. I'm going to do the same thing here, but I'm going to bring it in. Now, from the middle of my two circles, I'm going to come around and connect to the bottom of my L. Now I'm going to come where the bottom of my L was, and I'm actually going to loop this all the way around. Now I am going to add another line here, another line here, and my last line here. And then I'm going to put little circles on them. I'm going to come back and put two circles here. I am going to come up here and put a little smile. Now I'm going to come back and draw a straight line in my wings and add a little accent. Just two lines on one side, one line on the other side. Now I actually have a fly. When I get to my coloring, I'm actually going to just color the back of my fly in. So I'm going to make that Y disappear. And when you get to that part on your coloring sheet, you will see. Now I actually have a fly. So once you have your fly, everything else is totally up to you in terms of composition. I could come back here and I could add a cloud. I could come up here and I could add a flower. I could come back here and I could add some action behind my fly. Come here, do another cloud. And ultimately, when I put that in color, that's what your composition would look like in color. So it's not always how we start. It's ultimately how we finish. So these are step-by-step instructions, and what you just learned to do are called word tunes. Key being the word. We start with the word, we turn them into cartoons. This is the basic how to do animation from scratch. Hope you guys enjoyed the lesson. I look forward to working with you over the next 2 weeks. Take this time to ask your instructor that's in class with you any questions. You can actually rewind the tape. You can see it again. She can pause it for you on any steps that may have confused you or if I went a little too fast in the lesson. But hopefully you were able to get something out of this. And I look forward to not just doing another lesson with you, but coming down to Montgomery and working with you guys in person. Again, thank you guys so much for spending this afternoon, this evening with me. And I look forward to seeing you again for the next session. Thank you guys very much.